If our nation is to maintain preeminence in aeronautical and space flight, there are four principal areas where a continuing and driving program of research is required. These are the areas of propulsion and energy conversion, materials and structures, control, guidance, and communications, and finally, the space sciences and the environment of space.
How will it feel to walk on the surface of the moon? With only a sixth of his weight to move against lunar gravity, how will man be able to function there? How will man survive the forces he will experience on his flight to the moon? Once launched, how will he rendezvous with another vehicle in space? How will he dock his vehicle or mate it with another so he can continue on his way? And how will man navigate through space to place his Apollo capsule in orbit around the moon? For that is where NASA astronauts will certainly go within the next few years. Already the route these men will travel through space is being practice flown at NASA centers for advanced research. Their cockpit instrumentation is familiar to these pilots' eyes, and their cockpit controls are familiar to the hands of men who will make the Apollo flight. Already these men are learning the ABCs of controlling something like the vehicle that will land them on the surface of the moon. And they know the familiar behavior of the gyro that will help to guide them home to Earth again. All this is the result of NASA's advanced research. But what we have seen so far are the results of yesterday's research. The results of investigations made and ideas born months or even years ago. What kind of research is going on today? Where will this take us 10 or 15 years from now? And what will this mean to all of us? Not just to the handful of NASA astronauts, scientists, and engineers who lead the way.
Our Advanced Research and Technology program is already studying the problems of space and the exploration of the planets such as Mars and Jupiter. Literally, our program will take us out of this world, and yet it affects the lives of every American.
With its headquarters in Washington, D.C., NASA is established in several states. These principal NASA facilities are supported by a number of major contractors. These major contractors work with 11,000 subcontractors and suppliers scattered throughout the United States. The result is a multi-billion-dollar operation, directly affecting millions of Americans in the families of men and women working on NASA projects now. The Langley, Lewis, and Ames Research Centers, the Flight Research Center at Edwards, California, and the Electronic Research Center at Cambridge work in advanced research.
A little more than 10% of the total NASA budget is spent on advanced research and technology. And yet, all our progress flows from this relatively small expenditure.
Let's look at it this way. We in advanced research are laying the technological foundation for the future, 10, 15, or even 20 years from now.
Hidden away behind the Smithsonian Institution is an old Atlas missile. Atlas, the booster used for Project Mercury. We'll use it for Centaur, too. But since Atlas, chemical rockets have grown in size. Now they threaten to reach the towering height of the Washington Monument. To some, this seems the next logical step in the continuing search for more thrust to lift heavier payloads. We began with Atlas. For Project Gemini, we will use Titan II as a booster. Saturn for the Apollo project is the next step up in chemical rockets. Perhaps it will prove to be the last.
If we're not going to build a rocket as tall as the Washington Monument, then we've got to get away from chemical combustion. Chemical propellants liberate only a certain definite amount of energy for each pound of propellant weight, and this energy can be made no greater. But small, electrically charged particles can be accelerated to enormous jet velocities, limited only by the power we have available to accelerate them.
As early as 1906, Goddard suggested that, theoretically, a charged particle could be accelerated to the speed of light. 50 years later, NASA built huge vacuum tanks at Lewis to investigate this phenomenon. What are we looking for in this simulated space environment? An electric rocket engine of some kind with which to propel a vehicle in space for many weeks. The most promising thrusters of this kind seem to be electrostatic or ion rocket engines in which cesium or mercury fuel is ionized and the resulting electrons removed. A comparatively small amount of energy is required to produce the high exhaust velocities these engines give. There are still problems to be solved in this area, but they will have to be solved in space itself. Engines like this should prove to be extremely efficient and reliable, and they should prove relatively inexpensive to build and to operate. Here's a bank of 9 ion engines on a test stand. For future interplanetary voyages lasting 100 days or over, more than 9 of these engines would be needed. But these prototypes have been successfully tested in simulated space. Tests like this may lead to an operational electric rocket producing the necessary thrust for the required length of time. Our work in electric propulsion has also led to the development of huge electromagnetic coils like this, which generate over 200,000 Gauss, the largest magnetic field ever produced.
These fields are created essentially for free, that is, they absorb no power. With these very large magnetic fields, we should be able to do such things as alter the structure of matter and build new materials that have never been created before. Other economic side effects, which we will get from these new materials, is we should be able to build small, very small electric motors that are very powerful. We should be able to build small, powerful electro generators. In fact, we should be able to take a normal city substation, which would occupy something the size of a block, and put it into something the size of an office desk. The cost of conversion from the usual system to the superconducting system probably will be paid for by the released real estate, which we would no longer need. This discovery was made by a few people working in advanced research in the laboratories, and the economic side effects are going to be tremendous.
The same kind of thing has been going on here at Langley Research Center in electronics, especially at the Instrument Research Division. Our motto for the past few years has been, think small. No matter what the power source may be, the weight and size of anything placed aboard an interplanetary vehicle are going to be critical. Generally speaking, the smaller and more reliable, the better.
The size, the weight, the reliability of electronic components are particularly critical. And yet extensive circuitry like this is needed in every vehicle or satellite launched. A continuing effort is being made, therefore, to design new circuits, develop new components that will further reduce the size and weight of the electronic package required. The result is miniaturization. The smaller and smaller circuits designed for aircraft, for missiles, for satellites, and other space payloads. This small module is typical of conventional miniaturization developed by NASA in the past. But the trend to miniatures has continued into microelectronics, where the ability to think small is even more important. The porcelain chip under this microscope contains the same circuitry normally housed in units 10 times its size and weight. Reducing these circuits to the smallest possible size and weight is necessary if we are to voyage anywhere beyond the moon. A mission to Jupiter or Mars will require even more complex and advanced electronic equipment than we now have. And yet this increased complexity must be packaged in even smaller and lighter units than anything we have today. Langley's success in microelectronics has, therefore, a long-range significance. Cheaper to make, much smaller and more reliable than anything we have so far developed, they are only a third of the weight of the equipment they replace. Imagine a computer now filling a room as big as a two-car garage, reduced with a series of chips like these to fit in the drawer of an office desk. Or imagine a 5-watt high-fidelity amplifier, no bigger than a 25-cent piece.
Imagine, if you can, the spacecraft for which all these new components are going to be designed. Here at Ames, we're working on what is really the essential concern of the Office of Advanced Research and Technology. What will be the configuration or shape of the vehicle designed for interplanetary travel? How will it look, the spacecraft we're going to build for voyages beyond the moon and back to Earth again? Our work on reentry vehicles stems from the early 1950s, when we were first concerned with the problem of bringing a long-range ballistic warhead down through the atmosphere without risk of its destruction by aerodynamic heating resulting from the friction of the air. These vehicles enter the Earth's atmosphere at speeds in excess of about 4 miles per second and decelerate very rapidly. You can imagine that if you tried to stop your car at such a relatively high speed, the friction in the brake drums would burn them up.
Influenced by conventional aerodynamic experience, the early designs for re-entry vehicles were needle-nosed, slender cones. We knew that with the material then available, such shapes could not withstand the re-entry heating due to surface friction. The trick was to give heat to the surrounding air, not to the body. The question was, how could this be done?
We reasoned we would have to use blunt shapes for these bodies. A high-drag body generates intensely strong bow shock waves. Friction within the shock layer mainly heats the air and not the body, and so performs the desired transfer of the majority of the heat to the atmosphere.
In other words, the energy resulting from the vehicle's motion is converted to heat as the blunt-nosed vehicle slows during atmosphere re-entry. And the fraction of heat entering the vehicle is proportional to the ratio of the surface friction to the total drag of the vehicle. The blunter the body, the less heat it has to accept. The outcome of this research was that re-entry vehicles like the old Mark II nose cone could be designed to accept only about 1% of the total heat liberated on re-entry. When these warheads were being designed, no serious consideration was being given to the possibilities of space travel. Yet when Project Mercury was proposed, the work that had already been done for the Atlas Mark II led to the configuration of the Mercury capsule and made space travel possible. Fortunately, design criteria established at Ames in 1950 for the shape of the Atlas nose cone and of the Mercury capsule, too, will still be applied to Gemini and Apollo. And all this resulted from work done with a pencil and a pad of paper in an NACA research center. Notes like these represent the first tangible beginning of advanced technology. A period of step-by-step progress followed from that idea to the ultimate success of Project Mercury and toward Gemini and Apollo. Ideas, notes jotted down, a theory born and models devised for further wind tunnel research. This is the process arising from pure analysis that leads to success. This process gave us not only the first intercontinental ballistic missile and those weapons on which the defense of the free world rests today. It also makes possible our manned flights into space. Flights made successfully in laboratory tests long before the men, the money, and the material are committed in space. And yet the work that began all this and led to the process that continues our success cost the people of the United States only $5,000, including the printer's bill for reproducing the original manuscript at Ames.
Of course, we spent a great deal more than $5,000 working out the details in wind tunnel studies and other laboratory work. But even so, the cost of advanced research is cheap. Now, let me give you another and more recent example of how important it can be. From a research standpoint, we can't stop where we are today. We may someday want to travel to Mars or Venus and return. Even more distant excursions may become of interest, but trip times for such voyages can become excessive. A round trip to Mars, for example, would take 2.5 years at minimum energy speed. It becomes attractive, then, to consider entering the Earth's atmosphere at much higher speeds, say 10 or 15 miles per second, and that means heat.
Now we are faced with an additional problem. Frictional heating is not our only heating problem. As speeds increase, the confused air in the bow shock layer becomes so agitated as to radiate heat, much as in a furnace. The radiation intensity behind the shock of a blunt body becomes so high, in fact, that radiant heating is the principal culprit at these higher speeds. The clue to the solution of this problem can be seen here. Note that where the bow wave is perpendicular to the direction of the motion, the radiation is far more intense than at the sides where the shock wave is inclined. This led us to examine stubby, conical shapes. The inclined shock wave greatly reduces the radiation. Of course, we pay some penalty in friction heating for this. But from an overall point of view, we make great gains at meteor speeds by this ruse.
There are problems. Frictional heating tends to burn away the tip of the vehicle, so we must make provision to prevent this. We have, in fact, found some acceptable solutions through experimentation. More important, we know that even though there are these other problems that must be solved, a mission to Mars is feasible. And the fact is, as before, the cost of the advanced analytical research that gives us this assurance has been negligible. Including actual experiments conducted here at Ames, the total bill has probably been under $30,000.
Further experimentation costing much more than $30,000 will of course be necessary if we pursue this work for ultimate application to actual space flight. But whatever we pay to advance technology, it remains only a small part, roughly 10% of NASA's total expenditure. This is a small enough price to pay for what NASA's Office of Advanced Research and Technology has given us: design criteria for the next flight vehicle. We haven't had time to look into other problems in research for the future on which NASA men and women are working now. Aeronautical research in the design and development of a supersonic transport. Follow-on flight research with the X-15. Work being done with VTOL aircraft like the X-14. Work still being done for the Gemini project and for the Apollo mission to the moon. In NASA research centers, a whole new generation of satellites and space probes is being born. Launched into flight, these too will widen the horizons of man's knowledge of the universe. Tektite studies resulting from wind tunnel work made at Ames may lead to a better understanding of the moon's surface than we have ever had before, and NASA's constant search for new materials with which to build structures and components to perform projection missions that cannot be performed today may lead to who knows what new products, new designs. For in the future, as in the past, the work being done by NASA in all the fields of science will serve to take us deeper into unknown space by continuing advanced research.